Reverend Fox, thank you so much for joining us here again today. I want to ask you right off the bat. We had the public comment period close a week ago. The next step is what's next? So here I'm asking you, okay, you got 43,000 record public comments on a very important issue that moves cannabis off Schedule 1, even though the majority of the people still want it descheduled. Is that still the focus of NORML and every other organization down there in Washington, D.C.?
Well, in terms of moving policy, descheduling is absolutely still the goal. In terms of this particular scheduling review, descheduling really isn't on the table. So we want to make sure that we're concentrating on getting it off of Schedule 1, but at the same time, making sure that we're using this opportunity as a platform to talk about the need for descheduling. So I'm really glad that we saw that the vast majority of the comment period did prefer, or the comments that were received did prefer descheduling. And looking at it in total, very, very few were still in support of keeping cannabis as Schedule 1. Now, DEA is required to consider all of those, but that doesn't mean that they have to necessarily take them seriously.
And delay has been happening for a long time in the government, even though the progress was exponential in the last, since 2019, 15 adult use states have gone adult use legal here. How much, and it seems that this process is already in the process of delaying again. Is there a time frame on this, and how important is the result of the election in 2024 going to impact that?
So in the immediate steps, the DEA has 30 days from the end of the comment period to announce whether or not they're going to have a hearing. And I think that there is a 110% chance that they're going to. And then there's 30 days for people to submit applications to participate in that hearing. And you have to show that you have standing, which could be a little bit difficult for like advocacy groups and whatnot. But I think that we're going to see a lot of people applying to participate in that hearing as well. Once that 30 days is up, then as far as I understand, there's really no statutory time limit on how long this stage of the process lasts. And then once DEA does initiate the final rule, there's 30 days for people to petition for administrative judicial review, which also does not have any sort of statutory timeline attached to it. So we could be looking at a very lengthy process. And we've already seen that because of petitions and letters sent by prohibitionist groups and anti-legalization law enforcement officials and elected officials, specifically calling for a delay, that I think that the people that want to keep cannabis on Schedule 1 think that delaying this process is in their best interests. Now, whether that is simply to give them more time to get their ducks in a row and try to build the best case they possibly can again for a relatively indefensible position, or whether they think that political developments over the next few months are going to dramatically decrease the potential for the scheduling process to move forward in a way that tends towards Schedule 3. I think that that's a difficult calculus to make, but leading right into your question about how much the election will impact this, I mean, if I think if Democrats do win the White House, I think that we're not going to see any opposition to the scheduling process moving forward whatsoever. And in fact, I think we might see a little bit more pressure to keep it to a reasonable timeline. And also Vice President Harris is the only candidate out there who has specifically called for descheduling and federal legalization. So, while it's uncertain exactly how much political pressure she would use to push for that policy, whether that's calling on Congress to do so or pressuring the Department of Justice to do it, I think that remains to be seen. But she's already said that like her position is pretty solid. If Republicans take the White House, then I think it's really kind of up in the air. I'm not as worried about a President Trump interfering with the scheduling process as I am about some of the people that he may bring with him to Capitol Hill and to Washington generally. I think that a new attorney general or a new DEA head could be significantly worse than what we have right now in terms of moving this process forward and using the overwhelming amount of information in favor of moving cannabis off of Schedule One. There could also be a lot of politics involved with it, aside from the science and policy implications and considerations that these agencies should be making. So, I think that it is pretty good political calculus for prohibitionists to try to drag this on as long as they possibly can.
And yet, moving it off Schedule One is still a huge win for the industry because it's allowing people to understand that there are actually medicinal uses of this plant. And that's perhaps the only win of moving it off Schedule One, whether it goes to Schedule 3 or deschedule. There's more and more an acceptance now that this actually does have this overwhelming science research and anecdotal evidence that this plant has medicinal qualities. That's the only win. It's still going to be illegal at Schedule 3. It's still going to be criminalized. It just changes an attitude more than a policy. And yet, it still has taken the FDA, they've had 6 years to figure out that you can actually get high from hemp. And they still haven't gotten any regulations on that. And there was a great
There's a lot of
article.
punting back and forth on that. I think
Yeah,
it is important to note that there is a symbolic win in moving cannabis off of Schedule One because
right,
opponents of legalization can no longer say that this has no medical value. You're
right.
absolutely right there.
Yeah,
A move to Schedule 3, unlike a move to Schedule 2, would actually fix the 280E tax issue for
right.
licensed cannabis businesses, which is also very important from a lot of different perspectives. Although I think initially I'm skeptical about how much that would actually trickle down to consumers, considering most businesses are operating in the red right now.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that that would still be important. But getting cannabis off of Schedule One, I think, is absolutely necessary, and we're seeing some opposition to it. Not just in terms of trying to delay the process, but we're also seeing, congressional letters going out from opponents to the White House, basically accusing the president of trying to do this for political purposes, which, every move that you make as president or as any public official is going to either have positives or negatives in terms of your political reception to that. So I think that the other part of that is that they're kind of, sometimes very blatantly accusing the president of malfeasance or of skirting the process when it comes to this. And, from my perspective, I can't see any validity to that argument whatsoever. I think that the process has gone along according to the law. Admittedly, the White House called for the scheduling review and initiated it, which is within its power to do so. The actual HHS review portion took a lot longer than I think most people expected. So I don't think that there's really any indication of any pressure being exerted to fast track that process in the beginning stages. Once that ruling or the proposed rule was released, the White House did move very quickly to move it onto the comment period. They had 60 days, and I believe they took like 5.
Right.
But aside from that, I haven't seen any indication whatsoever that there's been a whole lot of pressure being put on any of the agencies that are part of this process, nor have we seen any skirting of the process itself. We saw this clearly indicated from the fact that DEA in its proposed rulemaking clearly disagreed with the proposals and the reasoning put forth by HHS for a number of reasons. And it's really obvious that they do not want to do this and are kind of being dragged kicking and screaming along the process. But if there were any real political pressure being put on Ann Milgram or the DEA at large from the White House, we would know about it by now. It would be heavily in the news. There would be already congressional hearings on it. So I don't think that it's really valid to use that as an argument. The only thing that I have heard that I think might rise to the level of a derivation from the normal process is the fact that HHS used a new two-factor process protocol or consideration to determine whether or not cannabis would be appropriate for maintaining its Schedule 1 status. this is just whether or not there's a high potential for abuse and whether or not there are accepted medical uses for it. Pretty cut and dry. Now, admittedly, this is a criteria that they have not used specifically in the past for cannabis, but the criteria that they were derivating from was only established in 1992, and it was established as in direct response to the DEA's administrative law judges urging the DEA to remove cannabis from the schedule of controlled substances entirely. And DEA administrators fought in the courts for years in order to be able to maintain their ability to ignore their administrative law judges. And one of the things that they were able to do was institute this 5-factor test, which was specifically designed to make sure that cannabis could never be removed from Schedule 1, because the number one criteria in that 5-factor test is whether or not the substance is exactly reproducible and uniform, which is an impossibility for a botanical product.
Right. That's right. And there's never been a botanical product on a controlled substances schedule, right? I mean, it's that, and this is one of the things that, freaks me out because, and look, I make everything a sports analogy. A coach wants consistent performance from his players. Big Pharma wants consistent medication for its products. It's impossible when a product impacts different endocannabinoid systems in each mammal differently every time you use it and how you use it. So, they who are causing these delays know exactly what they're doing, Morgan. They're trying to make it as difficult as possible for the industry to survive. And it drives me nuts. It fires up my passion for it even more and digs in my heels even more to support the cause. But there's an interesting thing going on inside this industry now when you have political leaders from the state of Florida, and I'm talking about Governor DeSantis, embracing the illegal, unregulated Delta-8 hemp get you high market, if you will, so that he can defeat the adult use efforts that's on the ballot in the fall in his state. And how in the world is this industry ever going to survive if they can't come together and understand there should be one regulatory body that puts out regulations for this one agricultural product, a plant that is a medicine? And isn't that in the CAOA Act of Chuck Schumer and Cory Booker and Ron Wyden?
There's a pretty robust regulatory structure under the CAOA, much more so than other descheduling legislation that we've looked at. I think that there are still a lot of open questions about the best way to regulate cannabis and cannabinoid products. But I think that what's really important is a different point that you started on. Which is the assertion that Ron DeSantis is embracing the unregulated synthetic cannabinoid industry. I do not think that that is actually the case. I think that he is using those folks in order to help defeat the marijuana initiative, and that as soon as that is defeated, he's going to push for a bill that is even more restrictive than the one that he vetoed, and he's going to turn around and screw those people that he's currently using to help him beat legalization. We saw a very similar thing happened in Arkansas, where some of the pro-cannabis people were fighting against the legalization initiative because they didn't like the way that the licensing was structured, and were more concerned with that than they were necessarily with stopping people from getting arrested. And they were partnering with folks like Project SAM and local sheriff's associations and things like that. And then the very next election cycle, those same people that the activists were partnered with are now actively fighting against an initiative to expand medical in Arkansas. So, I mean, if you're trying to let the perfect be the enemy of the good and try to partner with prohibitionists in order to fight an initiative or bill that you don't like because it's not as good as you would like it to be, just word of warning, don't count on them to be your allies as soon as you accomplish your shared goal.
I'm shocked to hear that politicians work like that. I am shocked to actually hear that that happens, and it does. Last question about Texas, because I think it really, again, it's another example of a state that has a vibrant Delta-8 market. And and tons of unregulated goods getting into the hands of young people. And yet cities in that state now are instituting their own decriminalization legislation, much to the dismay of their governor and attorney general. And the attorney general has already fought it and lost in his own state court to allow this political process of putting questions to the people on ballots to make changes. Again, we're seeing this over and over again. I'm amazed that we've made such progress, and yet we still have people in power doing the best job they can to delay and make it as difficult as possible for this industry to survive.
When you can't win hearts and minds, you have to resort to technicalities or stripping people's rights away.
That's right. And that's not America. I'm sorry. That's just not, I recognize we're not a true democracy. And that alone bothers me a little bit because we have to deal with the Electoral College that was created, 300 years ago. That being said, it's the fact of how operations work in politics. You're in it every single day. This is not news to you, but it keeps going and going and going. And when is it ever going to change?
Well, I don't know, but I do think that Texas is a really good indicator of the fact that you can achieve incremental victories in the face of tremendous opposition. I mean, cannabis policy reform writ large has been an issue of, well, we can't get the federal government right now. Let's keep working on them, but let's see what we can do at the state level. Same thing where if the state government is an insurmountable, at this point, barrier to reform, you start locally. And we've seen this over and over again in the history of cannabis policy reform, where you start out with passing local decriminalization or lowest law enforcement priority measures, and then slowly move up to the state level. And now we're starting to move more heavily into the federal level and gaining more progress there. But it really starts with your neighborhood and your neighbors, and that individual people power is the way that any of this serious change starts.
Right. Hey, Morgan Fox from NORML, always a pleasure to talk with you. I love taking a really what I consider to be an educated discussion at the highest level on these issues. And thank you to NORML and to you for making the time. And this has been a very special report for We Talk News. I'm PCM founder Jimmy Young. Coming up on We Talk News this week, WNBA superstar and Olympic champion Brittany Griner gets busted at a Russian airport for carrying hash oil.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elena Pinto, and this is Weed Talk News.
Hey, everybody. It's Brandon Jones with Big Green Distribution with the Missouri Cannabis Report.
I'm Karen Black from Green Finger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report.
I'm Matthew Friedlander, coming to you from the owner's office here at Skagit Organics.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters.
My name's Tom. You can find me over at Cannabis and Legalization News.
I'm Jill Goldsberry with We Talk News New Jersey, and we are back.
Andrew Behringer here reporting from Washington, D.C.
Our Canadian correspondent with We Talk News, Debbie Fazy with the Canadian Toke of the Week.
I'm Doug Miller from Highland Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for We Talk News.